Hey everybody, I am Chris Baker from LuckyGunner.com, and today I am going to show you a method for reloading a tube-fed shotgun called the Violin Load. There are tons of different ways to load and reload a shotgun. They've all got their strengths and weaknesses. For most methods, you use your support hand to do the reloading and either keep your shotgun mounted in your shoulder or bring it in under your arm like that, or maybe even flip it upside down. This one's a little different. You're going to bring the gun up on top of your shoulder and rotate it 90 degrees so it looks like you're playing a violin. The loading port should be facing away from you. Hang on to the forend with your support hand and just use your strong hand to do the actual reloading. Just pull your shells from your side saddle or your stock mounted shell carrier, your belt pouch or whatever, and slide them into the tube. This is a common position for twin loading and quad loading in 3-gun matches. Those techniques take a lot of practice to nail down. They work best with competition-specific guns and gear. But for loading just one shell at a time, I think this position might actually be easier to learn than the more typical support hand reloading techniques. It should also work with just about any tube-fed shotgun out there, whether it's modified for competition or not. If you have run the gun completely empty and you need to load the chamber before you load your tube, for right-handed shooters, it's pretty simple. The ejection port is right there, so you're just going to grab your shell, drop it in, and close it up. Hit your bolt release if you've got a semi-auto. With a pump action, when you drop the shell in there, you're going to need to cup your hand over the ejection port and hang on to the receiver so you can run the action home without pulling the gun off your shoulder. Left-handed shooters, you're not going to be able to actually see the ejection port once you've got the gun up here, and you're going to be working against gravity. So you might be able to get this to work if you kind of support the shell with your hand while you're closing the action. I'm not sure I would count on that working. On a semi-auto, it's probably going to be tough to support the shell and hit the bolt release with the same hand. There might be better ways of doing this, but the best suggestion I have is to either load the tube and then rack one in, or if you want to load the port, just use a support hand reload for that first shell, then get it up on your shoulder to load the tube. The Violin Load is not anything new. I mentioned 3-gun competitors earlier. They've been using variations of this technique for years. It's probably even older than that. In the defense training world, any kind of strong hand loading has often been viewed with skepticism. A lot of us have had it drilled into us that you should never take your firing hand off the gun ever, and you should do all your loading and manipulations with the support hand only so you can be ready to fire the gun at a moment's notice. That still might be a good principle to go by in some contexts. I think it makes a lot more sense when your gun is a lightweight carbine and you're talking about just running a charging handle or changing a box magazine. Because shotgun manipulations are inherently more complex, I think we should lean toward methods that work most reliably regardless of which hand that requires us to use. I first gave this technique an honest try earlier this year during the shotgun class I took with Steve Fisher. I also used it a lot during the Thunderstick Summit in Dallas last month. That was 3 days of shotgun training with 5 different primary instructors. That gave me a great opportunity to look at the pros and cons of this method and discuss it with some of the instructors and other students. Now, I'm used to loading the gun with the stock under my arm, pinned against my side with my elbow. I've always felt that was the most stable position, especially if I'm going to be loading a lot, like in a training class. Having the gun up on my shoulder feels even more stable and it's less fatiguing. I can also see what I'm doing. Even if I keep my eyes focused downrange, I have a pretty good idea of what's going on in my peripheral vision. That means I fumble the shells less often. I also have better control over the muzzle. At the range, putting the gun up here automatically points the gun in what is almost always a safe direction. I don't have to worry about the muzzle wandering up over the berm or something like that. Better control over the muzzle also means if I have a light on my gun, I have better control over where the light is pointed. If I need to stop loading and start shooting at a moment's notice, I can actually fire from this position. This is essentially the same as the close quarters short stocking position that I covered in a video a while back. We did a lot of moving and shooting at the Thunderstick Summit with an emphasis on controlling your muzzle position at all times and also on loading the gun on the move. Violin loading had some huge benefits there as well. As far as disadvantages, honestly, I haven't found any that are all that major. If I'm in an upper story of a building and I've got people below me, I may not want to have the muzzle down. I might want to use a muzzle forward technique at that point. Violin loading is probably not the best position to use if I just need to get a single round in the gun as quickly as possible. If I just want to top off the tube with one shell, or if I've got an empty gun and I just want to port load and fire real quick, I probably will just keep that gun shouldered. But if I want to stay consistent with which hand is doing what, I can use my strong hand for loading like that. I'll just cant the gun 45 degrees and I can load with my strong hand like that. If you are loading out of a side saddle, this reload almost requires you to have all your shells oriented brass down. For a lot of shell holders, they will work their way loose if the shells are brass down. To avoid that, I recommend the quick detach carrier from Aridus Industries or the Velcro shell cards from Vang Comp Systems or from S-Tac. I've never had the shells come out of any of those carriers when I did not want them to. Now, to get back to reality, this is all fairly academic, at least in a defensive context. Reloading a shotgun in the middle of a fight is just not a thing that happens. Shotguns almost always do what we need them to with one or two shells. With buckshot or slugs and anything approaching decent shot placement, reloading is basically irrelevant. But for those of us who like to nerd out on shotguns and prepare for implausible worst case scenarios, this is the kind of thing we like to talk about for fun. I do think violin loading might be worth considering if you're teaching people defensive shotgun skills. It may not be a priority skill for emergency use, but at the range we have to reload anyway, so we may as well do it efficiently. Having at least one loading technique that you're comfortable with also builds confidence in gun handling, and it tends to make you a safer shooter to be around. At the Thunderstick Summit, Daryl Bolke mentioned that he has been teaching this technique to his intro-level shotgun classes lately, and people have been picking it up very quickly. It seems to work especially well for students with a background in more traditional shotgun sports like bird hunting and clay shooting. Like I said earlier, it's also very stable, it's easier to see what you're doing, and it gives you better control of the muzzle. All things that are beneficial when you're teaching someone who is new to running a shotgun this way. Guys, I hope you found some of this helpful or at least interesting. If not, please accept this important life tip as a consolation prize. Never store fresh, uncut tomatoes in the refrigerator. They will lose their flavor and they'll get mushy. Don't store your ammo in the fridge either. Keep it in a cool, dry place and always buy it from us with lightning fast shipping at luckygunner.com.